Hello and welcome to the New York State Political Science Association History and Politics panel. I would like to turn over the microphone to the moderator of this panel, Matthew Halakias. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Sure. My name is Matthew Halakias. I'm a historian who specializes in Cold War Italian history and Cold War American political developments, but today I'll be moderating the panel, Jewish Political Identity in the United States and Germany. Each of the panelists here today will present their research, and we will move on to questions after everyone has presented. First, though, we will be starting with Kevin Broner. Kevin is a public professor in public administration at the Nelson A. Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy at the University of Albany. He holds a PhD in public administration, and today Kevin will present on Adolf Hitler and Article 48 on the Weimar Republic Constitution in Germany from 1919 to 1933. So feel free to take it away.
Okay, thank you, Matt and Chris. So I'll start off. There was a Weimar Constitution formed in Germany right after World War I. The reason it's called Weimar is that that's a small city west of Berlin where this was being organized. And there was a lot of conflict in the city of Berlin, so they actually adopted the Constitution in Weimar. Now, there's some important aspects of this Constitution that I think we really have to consider. First of all, it replaced the monarchy in Germany. So the monarchy failed in World War I, right at the end. The Constitution had some progressive elements in it. Universal voter suffrage was established. It set up a parliament with power, the Reichstag and the Landtag. The Landtag's kind of like our Senate, where it's the people come in from the states, and the Reichstag is kind of like our House, where they come in based upon population. Now, this Constitution had a national vote to elect the president, and most readings that I do on this said this was considered one of the most progressive constitutions in Europe. So it was really something that they established this. Now, when they established the Constitution, there were some threats out there in society. Even though they had a new Constitution and it looked like it was very progressive, there were still some underlying interest in Germany that really wanted political power. One of them was the Prussian state government. Prussia is a state in Germany, which right after World War II, it dominated about 2/3 of the land and 2/3 of the population. And Prussia had a lot of the big military leaders in Germany. So this Prussian state government interest was very strong as this new constitution came into play. Now, the monarchy had been overthrown, but there were still interests in Germany who supported the monarchy. So they were still present. And then another threat, a lot of people in Germany thought that they really didn't lose World War I. There was this stab in the back theory that was developed that the German army was sold out by the politicians. So the military people, they were still influential in Germany at this time. And then as we go through the 1920s, the fascist and communist parties developed, and that became a threat. The Communist Party developed first, and then the fascists followed. But by 1933, when this constitution was trashed, those two parties controlled about half of the votes in Germany. So they were developing at this time. So my paper really focuses here on the first three elements of this threat. So continuing on, if we look at, there's a lot of research from this era, and I have it in my paper outline there, but in 1919, right after World War I, about 76% of the German public supported democracy. Now we move on, we move way out to 1932. At this time, the Great Depression is in effect in Germany. The Nazi Party and the Communist Party are coming on strong. So by 1932, only about half of the people, 49%, supported democracy. And by 1933, that had fallen to 33%. So what a lot of the historians say is that this experiment with democracy was fine in the beginning. But by the time we get to 1933, when it really collapses, only about a third of the people in the country support democracy. Now, there was a couple presidential elections here, and Paul von Hindenburg, he became the president of Germany, and he won about 50% of the vote. Adolf Hitler won 37%, and Ernst Thälmann earned about 10%. So this is kind of interesting because this shows that by the end of this period, that Hitler only had 37%. He was never elected to any office. So it shows that the voting trends in Germany had changed somewhat, but Paul von Hindenburg was still the president of Germany. So I'm going to move it back a little bit. Now, the heart of my paper is this Article 48, and this is a portion of the Weimar Constitution. It had several provisions in it, many articles, but this is the one that a lot of people think was problematic. So it's Article 48. And what this did, this allowed the president to declare a form of martial law. So if one of the states in Germany, there were numerous states in Germany, they could request that there was some kind of disorder in their community, and the president could declare martial law. And this was a big feature in this Constitution. It was probably the worst feature of the Constitution. So the president could declare martial law. The president could suspend parliamentary powers. So that Reichstag, which was a really important legislature, and the Landtag, that they would lose all their power. The president could also use the military to restore order. So that was another big piece of this. And I just put an asterisk there. Basic citizens' rights were suspended. In the Weimar Constitution, the rights are written right into the body of the Constitution. And in our Constitution, it's the Bill of Rights and the amendments. They're written in there. But in this Constitution, the president could suspend the rights of the citizens. So you think of this, if we thought of it today in our country, if we had a article in our Constitution that the president could declare martial law, suspend the Congress, use the military as one, and do away with the Bill of Rights and all the amendments, that's a very dangerous mechanism to have. So just to continue on, the historians really show that this was used numerous times under questionable circumstances. They would use it for all types of items that one of the states didn't like. It may not have really been a need for martial law, but they'd use it under really questionable circumstances. So let's look at 1930. In 1930, the German parliament passed 98 bills, laws that went into power, and the Article 48 powers were used 5 times. Now let's look at 1932. This is when the Nazi Party and the Communist Party are really starting to take hold. The Nazis are the biggest winners in this period. But look what's going on now. The laws passed by Parliament in 1932, there was only 5 of them. And the Article 48 powers that year, it was used 66 times. So this is becoming really a dangerous situation. We remember that only about a third of the people in Germany support democracy at this time. The president, Paul von Hindenburg, is using this Article 48 power all the time. And if we think of Paul von Hindenburg, he was a leader of the German, one of the big leaders of the German army in World War I. So that military influence is there. He's a Prussian. So he's in favor of Prussian dominance. So the threats to the Constitution are just enormous at this time. Just to continue on here, I have a lot more about him on this slide. He was a German World War I military leader, Prussian background, big user of, let's just say, Article 48 powers. Then what happens as we get to the end of this period is that Hitler becomes German chancellor. Now, how did he become German chancellor? He didn't win any elections. They had won the Reichstag election, and with the communists, they controlled about 50% of the voters in Germany. But he was actually appointed. Adolf Hitler, he didn't come in and have some kind of a revolt or anything. He was appointed the Chancellor of Germany under the Weimar Constitution. And then we all know the history of that. But what's important here is that there was I get into this a little bit in the paper. There was a fire in the Reichstag, and the Nazis took over in March 30th. They really took over big time. And that Article 48 power was actually used by President Hindenburg to allow Hitler to disable any opposition. So it was this Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution that really gave Hitler the unlimited power. And that was through a piece of legislation called the Reichstag Fire Decree, really initiated under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. And then that basically gave Adolf Hitler the right to eliminate any opposition in their parliament. So he did away with all the communists, and you can read about the Nazi officials figured out how many people they had to kick out of the parliament in order to pass any bill they wanted to pass, and that's what happened. They passed this Enabling Act in 1933 that allowed basically Adolf Hitler to write all the legislation for the country and to pass it. So what we're seeing here is this awful case study where Article 48 of what was supposed to be a progressive constitution was used by powers people who had different goals, Prussian military, the Prussian government they wanted to restore, the military, and even some monarch. There were people who wanted a monarchy in Germany at this time. So what's pretty interesting about this whole period is that the Nazi Party used Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution to take over power. And you can even, I have other aspects of this that aren't in the paper, but research I've done, they passed many, many laws under the Weimar Constitution, the Nazis did. So they're trying to make it look legal. So what I'm getting to here is that when you look at a constitution that seems to be progressive, seems to be fairly well established, seems to be supported by most of the voters, about 76%, there may be mechanisms in there that people put in that constitution so that they could dominate it. And that's pretty much what my paper is about.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll be doing the questions after everyone has presented. Okay. And then when we get to that point, everybody feel free to ask each other questions once we get to that point. Thank you very much, Kevin. Next, we will have Dr. Diane Sipkin, Professor of Media, Communication, and Visual Arts at Pace University in Pleasantville, New York. She has had articles published in Americana, the Journal of American Popular Studies, 1900 to the present, the Journal of Radio Studies, the Ohio Speech Journal, the Florida Communication Journal, the New England Journal of History, has a chapter in anthology, Courage of Conviction, Women's Words, and Women's Wisdom, and regularly reviews books on the Holocaust for martyrdom and resistance published in Yad Vashem. Today, Dr. Sipkin will present on The Prophet Ignored, Vladimir Zev Jabotinsky, I hope I pronounced that right, and the Coming of the Holocaust.
Thank you. I must admit and begin by saying that the Holocaust interests me and has been a part of most all of my writings because my parents and my brother are survivors of the Holocaust. So I've always felt that you should write about and do research on what interests you. It makes it more than work. It makes it interesting. So far, and in fact, my father was always interested in what the world was doing while he was just trying to survive. So most of my writings have been about the period during the war. So I wrote about the German-American Bund, about Lindbergh, about the March of the Rabbis in Washington. I even wrote about Fiorello LaGuardia as the mayor of New York during wartime. Vladimir Jabotinsky was a name my father did mention. And I first discovered him actually through his son because his son was involved with the march in Washington. But then I discovered Jabotinsky. He was a distinguished writer, orator, political leader who saw the catastrophe of the Holocaust coming and actually wanted to do something about it. The paper investigates who he was, how he came to his premonition as regards the Jews, the bold actions he took and why it didn't work. And I actually tell his story. So we begin with his background, which is very important. In fact, even where he was born is important. He was born in Odessa in 1880. And that's quite important because in Odessa, you could not feel anti-Semitism. The Jews and the non-Jews mixed freely. There was no Jewish quarter. And so Jabotinsky grew up like a regular little boy. He always, a big part of all this is that he wasn't afraid to fight. When somebody came up against him, he would fight back. He would stand his ground and he would fight. He wasn't much of a student, but he loved to read. He loved to read, he loved to write, and throughout his life, he learned about 7 languages. Actually, that's not too unusual because in Europe, people are, invaded by so many different countries that, you pick up a lot of languages. But I think a big part of who he became was the fact that he loved to read. As far as his family life, they were not overly religious, even though his mother lit candles on Friday. And when he was asked about how he felt about Israel and the coming of a nation, he said, well, listen, I always felt there'd be an Israel. After all, my mother said so. In his late teens into his early 20s, he left Odessa and went to study in different places. He studied in Bern, Switzerland. And that was very important because he fell into a Russian community there that had made Switzerland their home, Bern, and they would have debates and meetings, and he went to all of these. And at some point there, he actually gave his first Zionist speech where he predicted a Bartholomew's Night for the Jews, which referred to the attack by the Catholics on the French Huguenots in 1572, where many of them were killed. Where did he get this idea? We don't know. Quite honestly, we don't know. He was doing a lot of reading. He did go to a lot of these debates. There was a lot of talk about many things. In fact, Bern, Switzerland was a political hotbed, but we really don't know. In the end, even in this speech, he said that the only way that Jews could avoid this Bartholomew's Night was Palestine. the return. Again, where did it come from? From his reading, maybe it came from Leo Pinsker, who was an early Zionist before Herzl. After he studied in Bern, Switzerland, he went to study in Rome. And there he had a very interesting teacher. His name was Antonio Labriola. And from him, he picked up the idea of monism, which really has to do with the fact that when Vladimir Jabotinsky became a Zionist, he was a Zionist without hyphen. Not a communist Zionist, not any kind of socialist Zionist. He was simply a Zionist. He also fell in love with Italy, and specifically the Italian love of their country, of nationalism, which also gave him that idea of the Jewish nationalism. Again, he also met a Zionist, S.D. Salzman, who gave him books to read about Zionism. The turning point, however, in Jabotinsky's life was the Kishinev pogrom in 1903. He dreamed of being a journalist, and that's what he was doing to make a living. And journalists, Winston Churchill was a journalist. Journalists were always people who knew what was going on in the world before anybody else did. They were very, very well aware. At any rate, he was sent by his newspaper to Kishinev, which was in Bessarabia. They were brutally attacked, the Jews there, by the Moldavians. They were charged with the blood libel, which is an old story coming back from the Middle Ages. In other words, that the Jews were using the blood of Christian children for their rituals. Anyhow, he went there for the newspaper, bringing all kinds of food and help, and he saw what had been done to the Jews. It was really very brutal and inhumane, and he couldn't get over it. He also met a lot of other Zionists there, and he met Chaim Nachman Bialik, who was the national poet of Israel, and he would later translate a lot of his works. From that, Jabotinsky started to write much more about Jews and the Jewish community. He was completely drawn to what was happening to the Jews and their problems. He also started to speak. A lot of speaking. And he was in 1903, he was a delegate to the 6th Zionist Congress in Basel. And that's where he first heard, and unfortunately it was the last time he heard, Herzl. He fell in love with Herzl. He became a Herzlian. He idolized the man. And in fact, in many ways, became much like him. In fact, he's considered, if he would have a child, it would be Jabotinsky. Jabotinsky became a Zionist propagandist. He traveled everywhere. He was in Lithuania. He was in Russia. Audiences loved him. They packed the house. He never had a theater that was too big for him. There was never enough room for all the people that came. He had an expressive voice, elegant gestures. He was a dignified man, and he was passionate about his belief in the return to Zion. He also was concerned with how to create his speeches so that people understood it, not just with passion, but through logic. And he would bring a lot of argument and logic into his speeches so that people got the full story of what Zionism was all about. And again, people came to hear him. He spoke about Jewish nationalism. He spoke about the mistaken beliefs of assimilationists and socialists, because a lot of Jews had become assimilationists and a lot had become socialists and even communists. He spoke about the importance of the Hebrew language used in Russian schools to teach Jewish subjects, and that Hebrew would be the language of the nation to be. He was active in World War II. He was a war correspondent. While he was in that part of the world in the Ottoman Empire, he got the idea that there should be a Jewish legion made up, of course, of Jews who would fight alongside the British. He felt this would give them some kind of an in at the peace talks as far as getting land in Palestine. And that's basically what happened in 1917. We have the Balfour Declaration, where Britain promised and became the mandate holder of Palestine, promised to the Jews. It was the beginning of good and bad things, 1917. He created the Beitar. Beitar was groups of boys and girls, mainly boys, got together, and Jabotinsky always believed in fighting. He always believed that the Jew should stand up for himself. In fact, when he was once asked, well, how about nonviolent, nonviolent? He said, no, take a look what it's done to the Jew in the shtetl. It hasn't made anything better for him. In fact, the non-Jew only feels braver when he hits him once, he'll hit him again. Now, Jabotinsky believed that along with learning the Aleph Beis or the Hebrew alphabet, you should learn how to shoot a gun, because that's the world understood that, and that was what he believed. So he started the Bebetar movement. He was unhappy with Chaim Weizmann, even though years before they had been roommates. He found Chaim Weizmann to be too pliant, too agreeable when it came to the British. He seemed to say yes to everything. And that was not Jabotinsky at all. He was a radical, he was an extremist, and he left the World Zionist Organization and he started his own party. The worst, however, was in 1933 when Hitler came to power. He recognized Hitler immediately. He recognized the threat that he posed, not only to German Jews, but to all Jews. And he tried to talk about it at the World Zionist Congress, but the Congress refused to speak about it. They wouldn't even talk about helping the Jews in Germany in 1933. Why? They were scared to make things worse for the German Jews. So he started his own organization. He found that the new Zionist organization was a political activist organization. Its goal was to build a homeland for the Jews in Palestine and to liquidate the diaspora altogether. Because he said, listen, everybody's got a country. The smallest people have a little country. We should too. It's our right. He was disgusted with the British and their policy of, they were always placating the Arabs. They were afraid of not getting oil. They were afraid of losing their alliance with the Arabs. And it was at this point when he founded in 1935 the new Zionist organization that he introduced an evacuation plan. I must say, when I saw that, I thought to myself, if only my grandfather would have known about it. Of course, I don't know if he would have picked himself up and left, but I never knew that there was such a thing. At any rate, the idea of Jews simply evacuating Europe was first introduced in 1920 by Max Nordau, who actually worked with Theodor Herzl, but that came to nothing. Jabotinsky picked it up now, and he said, listen, 1.5 million Jews should leave Europe and go to Palestine. And he felt that most of them should come from Poland. Why? 3 million Jews were in Poland. And so, they were the most, but not just from Poland. They should come from the Baltic states, from Austria. And he said, because, and this is very interesting, he said, there's two kinds of anti-Semitism. There's the anti-Semitism of things and the anti-Semitism of men. The anti-Semitism of things was in Poland, in the cities, there were many, many Jews, and they took over a lot of jobs, all kinds of jobs. So when the Poles, the non-Jews, came from the villages into the cities to look for work, they couldn't get it. Who did they see who had the jobs? The Jews. He said, listen, Jabotinsky said, what do you want? It's Poland. Poland wants the Polish people to have work. We are just, who are we? We're not Poles, we're Jews. We're their stepchildren. Why should they want us to have those jobs? He looked at it logically. He didn't see the Poles as being anti-Semitic like the Germans. The Germans he saw as racial haters. They just simply hated the Jews, and he didn't even touch that. But he said, when it comes to the Poles, when it comes to the Romanians, when it comes to the Hungarians, they're not really racial anti-Semites. They're economic anti-Semites. And the answer is, we should leave. We should return to our home. After all, when Jews made discoveries in Poland, it was credited to the Poles. It's not like the Jews got the credit. When the Jews discovered something in Hungary, the Hungarians got the credit, or the Romanians got the credit. So he said, can you imagine the country we could create. My gosh, we could be the light to the world with all that we could offer the world. Sadly, and I think my time is going, sadly, as soon as Jews, unfortunately, heard, well, look, the Christians loved it. And in fact, when he went to see, and he was a brave man, he went to see the leaders of Poland, the leaders of Romania, of Hungary, and he said to them, listen, he didn't say, listen, I know you're an anti-Semite. He said, listen, I know you'd like to be rid of your Jews or get some out. Why don't you help me? I want the same thing. We want the same thing. And he had the Poles on his side, the king and King Carol, all of them. But the Jews, many of them were assimilationists. Many of them wanted to stay in Poland, and they saw Jabotinsky as the worst anti-Semite of all. In fact, they felt that he was giving the non-Jews, the anti-Semites, fuel. Here he was saying, get rid of the Jew, get rid of it. And these people wanted to stay. Aside from that, he'd made some enemies among Zionists, not his own Zionists, but from the World Zionist Organization, who also, we say in Yiddish, untergelegter Afissel, who put out a leg so that he could trip. You know, it was all, he had a lot against him. He kept trying, he kept talking, but it came to nothing. In the end, all he could do was continue giving his speeches throughout Russia and throughout Lithuania, Latvia. I think my father even heard him talking and convincing people, Jews, to leave the diaspora before the diaspora destroyed them. Another thing he did was that, this I didn't know, he arranged for illegal aliyah. Aliyah means return to Israel. And who did he arrange it with? The Polish king. And a lot of anti-Semites, not anti-Semites, racial anti-Semites, but economic. And so the Betar, those boys and girls that he had taught to be fighters, they were the ones who collected Jews in Europe. And it was the Irgun, the fighters in Palestine, another organization which he started, that helped them once they got there. So sadly, Jabotinsky died of a heart attack in America in 1940. But I tell you, he was truly a prophet ignored. Just think, thousands were saved because of his words. But just think, if people would have believed his words, how many more would have lived? I hope I didn't run over my time.
You did not, but thank you very much for that. Yeah, so we'll move on to our final presentation by Dr. Strum, is a professor of history and political science at Russell Sage College for 35 years, the Sherman David Specter Faculty Fellow in the Humanities from 2020 to 2022. And his most relevant publication in relation to today's panel is Albany Jews Creating a Community, just published online in the Journal of the National Social Science Association. Today, Dr. Strum will present on Albany's Jews, Kaddish for Abraham Lincoln.
Thank you. Jewish immigrants identified with their new country and sought acceptance as Americans. When national tragedies occurred, Jews joined with other Americans to show their loyalty. During the Civil War, Albany Jews enlisted in the New York Volunteers. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Congregation Bethel met on 18th April, 1865, and agreed to hold special services for the fallen president. The synagogue was draped in deep mourning for 30 days. Resolutions adopted by the congregation included, it is our duty as Israelites to abhor crime and as citizens of the United States to love and respect the president. At Anshe Emeth, Rabbi Max Schlesinger delivered a tribute to Abraham Lincoln on 19th April, 1865. A local newspaper praised the sermon for displaying the true patriotism and sorrow of the rabbi, as well as the congregation. Bethel Jacob, another synagogue led by Rabbi Isaac Ritterman, held special services for Lincoln, and the Bethel draped its synagogue in black for 30 days. Representatives of the German Literary Society, who were heavily Jewish, and members of Anshe Emet participated in the funeral parade when Lincoln's funeral train stopped in Albany. Lincoln's assassination allowed Albany's Jews to express their identity as Americans and as Jews. In other national tragedies, Albany's Jews demonstrated their loyalty as Americans and their self-identification as Jews, a distinct religious minority. When Charles Guiteau killed President James Garfield in 1881, Rabbi Max Schlesinger praised Garfield, the good, the noble, the illustrious, as a large crowd of Jews listened to him. Congregations in Albany and the Capital District joined a national day of mourning. 20 years later, Leon Jalgas mortally wounded President William McKinley. Congregations across the country prayed for the wounded president. Rabbi Alexander Lyons at Beth Emet delivered a special prayer on Erev Rosh Hashanah for McKinley's recovery. When he died, Beth Emet's congregation joined with the Trinity Methodist Church in commemoration services. More than 2,000 people attended the services at Beth Emet. Separately, Reform and Orthodox Jews held a joint service at Bethel Jacob with a special prayer in Hebrew for the fallen president and his successor, Theodore Roosevelt. In 1923, Warren G. Harding died of natural causes. All the congregations held a joint memorial service on 10th August 1923 at the Orthodox congregation Sons of Abraham. Then in 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt died in office. Members of all of Albany's congregations held a joint memorial service on 15th April 1945 at Bethel Jacob, as all of the city's churches and synagogues honored the late president. President John F. Kennedy's murder in November of 1963 produced a similar reaction. The Capital District Board of Rabbis issued a statement. With all our fellow Americans who are overcome with mourning and grief at the death of our young gallant leader of our republic, we pray for his family and support our new president, Lyndon Johnson. Each synagogue had special services for Kennedy. Beth Emet draped its altar and pulpit in black as Rabbi Alvin Roth honored the late president. Rabbi Roth represented the Jewish community in a citywide commemoration of the life of President John F. Kennedy. Each of these events allowed Albany's Jews to express their identity as Americans and Jews and show their acceptance by the larger community. World War I provided an opportunity for Albany Jews to show their patriotism. At least 338 men served in the military and 7 died in the war. Several of the men belonged to the YMHA baseball team and kept contact with the Albany branch of the Jewish Welfare Board. Julius Friedman missed the sounds of our club patrol. Jacob Patlin smiled when he heard that the Albany YMHA, defeated the Schenectady team. His heart was in the old game. Maurice Barash, a member of Beth Emet, stationed on the front lines in France in the summer of 1918, did not fear the German airmen. Jerry paid us a daily visit with his deadly bombs. But we're all pretty good baseball players, so why should we worry? By the way, his grandson lives down the block from me. Among other Jewish men on the front lines in France were Corporal Phil Bruner and Sergeant Meyer Katav. The men from Albany were part of 250,000 American Jews in the military during World War I. World War I accelerated the Americanization of Jewish immigrants and their sons who fought in the war, symbolizing the identification of the Jewish community with the war effort. Rabbi Samuel Goldenson of Beth Emmet suspended the American flag over the pulpit and remained there until peace was effected. The YMHA and YWHA merged into the Welfare Board, which assists Jewish men stationed on other parts of the country or abroad. Members of the Welfare Board distributed comfort kits and sweaters and held a reception at the Hebrew Educational Institute for men leaving for military service. The Welfare Board worked with Catholic and Protestant groups to show support for the men in uniform and ecumenical support for the war. Congregations like Bethel Jacob listed the congregation members in service and purchased war bonds to show support for the war. As a sign of ecumenical unity and patriotism, Rabbi Goldenson participated in a citywide event, sending 371 Albany men to military service. Jewish women made major contributions to the war effort, working for the Red Cross and Liberty loan drives. When the war ended, Beth Emmet joined with the First Unitarian Church in an ecumenical Thanksgiving with the Second Presbyterian Church and a joint victory service of all the Jewish congregations. And they participated in a memorial service in May of 1919 for the 7 men who were killed in the war. In May of 1921, the city held memorial services, including the reading of Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish religious services. Former Democratic Governor Martin Glenn and Republican Mayor James Watt thanked Albany Jews for their contributions to the war and patriotic service, confirming their acceptance as Americans. Albany newspapers ran positive stories of the contributions of Jewish men and women to the war effort. Comments by public leaders recognized Jews as Americans, reassuring Jews of their place in American society. Memorials of 1919 and 1921 reinforced the community's identity as Jews and as Americans. As historian Christopher Serber concluded, baseball and diaspora, federal immigrants and the United States Army, John Philip Sousa and Theodore Herzl brought these disparate elements together. And let me give you an example of that. 4,000 Jews from Albany, Schenectady, Troy, Amsterdam, Gloversville, Hudson, Glens Falls, and Cohoes marched through Albany on the 3rd of June, 1920, with banners in English and Hebrew, carrying the Stars and Stripes and the Zionist flag. According to the Albany Argus, shops and residences along the route were decorated with the Zionist flag, the 6-pointed blue star and stripes on a white background, and the red, white, and blue. As Jews celebrated the end of Ottoman rule in Palestine, the Balfour Declaration, and to quote the paper, the restoration of Israel. The marchers represent all Jewish societies and congregations in virtually every city in the capital district. A military band played Hatikva. This became the largest Jewish parade in the history of Albany. Speakers included Governor Al Smith, Republican Mayor James Watt, and former Democratic Governor Martin Glenn, as Albany's Catholics and Protestants endorsed the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Former Governor Glenn remained the most consistent and enthusiastic Catholic supporter of Jewish causes. The most prominent Jewish speaker was Rabbi Abba Hillel Silva, an equally committed Reform rabbi and militant Zionist. The parade suggested the continued split in Albany between the leadership of Beth Emmet, which opposed Zionism, the East European Jews, and the descendants who embraced Zionism. Silver's presence, along with the equally militant Reform Rabbi Joseph Jasson, formerly of Schenectady, and now Rabbi in Gloversville, revealed the divisions within Reform over Zionism. An explicit theme in the parade was Zionism and Americanism were not in conflict, and speakers stressed that Zionism was not incompatible with Americanism. And so again, this became part of the theme. When World War II began, the United States, it began with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Charles Stern Jr., who was a member of Beth Emmet, had joined the Navy in 1940. He was stationed on the Oklahoma, and he died on December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor during the Japanese attack. the first casualty from Albany. Rabbi Bernard Bamberger of Beth Emmet expressed the shock of the congregation at Stern's death and emphasized that all true Americans were joining in every phase of the war effort. Once again, synagogues put into their bulletins the men who served in the military, as did the chauffeur bulletin of Beth Emmet. Rabbi Bamberger kept in correspondence throughout the war with congregants in service like Simon Propp, Leonard Friedlander, William Buchheim, and David Mann. Bill Buchheim informed Bamberger they had been in almost constant combat for 5 months in March of 1945. He was serving in Germany, and he's seen, quotes, a little action. Jewish women contributed to the war. The Albany chapter of Hadassah raised $75,000 in 1943 as part of National Hadassah campaign for funds for the construction of bombers, Hadassah's Air Armada. As during World War I, Jewish families like those at Beth Emmet invited Jewish servicemen stationed in the Albany area for Sabbath dinners. B'nai B'rith sponsored day rooms for servicemen and cooperated with the Red Cross and the USO. The war ended in Europe. All the Jewish congregations joined with Catholic and Protestant congregations in a special prayer for Thanksgiving for the defeat of Germany in a citywide celebration. In May of 1945, Jews had proved their loyalty and Americanism in a Second World War. In 1948, at meetings in Albany and Troy, representatives of upstate Jewish communities reflected on the continued existence of anti-Semitism. In spite of the Jewish contributions during the 2 world wars and the Holocaust, anti-Semitism continued to exist, and Jews remained the other. Jews cannot go to hotels in Saratoga Springs, which had banned Jews since 1877. In Albany, Jews cannot go to lunch at the University Club or the Fort Orange Club, and dare not go to the Mohawk Club in Schenectady. As late as 1968, the Schenectady city manager refused to attend a meeting at the Mohawk Club because no Hebrews and no dogs were allowed. Quotas continue to exist at local educational institutions, whether the Albany Academy for Girls, the Albany Medical College, or prestigious Union College in Schenectady. Certain landlords would not sell or rent to Jews, and a glass ceiling existed on local businesses for hiring and promoting Jews. Public schools in the 1950s and 60s discouraged Jewish students from missing classes on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. As Stuart Rosenberg observed about the Jews of Rochester, which applied to the Jews of Albany, well, they thought of themselves principally as Americans. Their neighbors thought of them principally as Jews, who were aliens in a Christian society. From 1853 to 2011, Jews were quite vocal in denouncing anti-Semitism abroad, but far less local in dealing with local anti-Semitism. The dilemma of identifying with Jews abroad, identifying as Jews at home, and being considered an American and not the other can be summed up in 3 issues in 2011. Albany's Jews are constructing a memorial to the Holocaust on land donated by the Roman Catholic Church and held an emergency fundraising event in May 2011 for Israel due to the attacks by Hamas. At the same time, Congregation Beth Abraham Jacob requested a zoning variance to build an 8-foot protective fence around the synagogue. Anti-Semitic incidents in Albany and the 2008 mass shooting at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh led several Albany Capital District synagogues to increase security. As Nancy Pandolfo, the executive director of Conservative Ohev Shalom, told a reporter, you just don't know under what guise someone is going to be in for an anti-Semitic attack. Albany's Jews followed the advice of Rabbi Hyman Lasker in 1909. Let us be patriotic American patriots and Jewish believers. Let us teach our children to shed their last drop of blood for our country, America. Let them hold a Bible in one hand and the flag of the Stars and Stripes in the other. In spite of this, Albany Jews still feel the need for protective fences, private security guards, and increased police patrols to safely observe Sabbath services, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur.
Thank you very much. So now that we've gone through everyone's sort of presentation, I would like to start off with a question for each of you, and then we can move to questions to one another. And I have other questions as well if need be. But I would like to sort of start in order, and start with Kevin. I was wondering, in your paper, you discussed how basic rights were discussed, such as religion and religious association, with the eventual implementation of freedom of religion being granted in the Constitution. I was wondering, in what ways was freedom of religion protected? And were there any examples of how the state interacted or handled cases of anti-Semitism in the Weimar Republic?
The biggest event would be the coming of Hitler under the Weimar Constitution and the banning of the Jews. That's the biggest event. And if you look at I've also studied the legislation that was involved here. And if you look at a little bit later in 1933, you start to see laws that are implemented. And these laws, according to the Nazis, were implemented legally. Now, there was a big question, can a law be legal if it's not legitimate? So there was a debate going on. But anyways, to make a long story short, one of the laws that was implemented in 1933, I don't really have the detail of this in this particular paper, but I have it in another paper. One of the laws was trying to cleanse the public service of people they didn't want. And of course, one of the big groups was the Jews. So they would implement laws against the Jews. Another couple of the laws that I have in my paper have to do with the Nuremberg race laws of 1935. That Nuremberg was, it's a big Nazi center. So they had race laws that really went after the Jews living in Germany, prohibited doctors, lawyers, all sorts of people. So when the constitutions formed, there was some form of religious liberty in there. And when you read about Germany before that, there's talk that the Jews were actually emancipated in Germany in around 1871, which is interesting. And what happened was an argument developed, well, because we emancipated these people, they took over everything and we have to get rid of them. So that's the real major anti-Semitic theme that was coming up during the Weimar years, and obviously implemented by Hitler and his people.
Okay, thank you. Diane, I was wondering, when I read your paper, you discuss how Jabotinsky sent letters to Ottoman leadership, Germany's emperor, the Pope, King Vittorio Emanuele, leaders in Great Britain, and even the Tsar's interior minister. I was just wondering if you have any sense of what was written, and if there was any correspondence or type of reception from these letters being sent from him to these figures of power.
Actually, he went to see them. He didn't just, they weren't just letters. He went to see them. And they liked him very, very much, Jabotinsky. He had a way about him. He came off a European, a classic European. He didn't, I don't know how to put it, but he didn't come off as a Jew. He came off as a diplomat, a European, and he came to them with a logical issue. He didn't really bring, that we were talking about Jews, but he basically presented it as a logical issue. You have too many Jews in your nation. Actually, when Jabotinsky wrote about it, he said he compared it to a mother. A mother has her own children, and then she has children who are adopted. Who will she be better to? I mean, yeah, a mother, a real mother, would try to be good to all of them. But you have to take for granted that she's going to want the very, very best for her own children. So he didn't speak to them as if they were bad people. He said, listen, you have an issue, too many Jews. You want them to leave. So do I. Let's work together. And they liked him. In fact, they recognized the issue as one of nationalism. In other words, the Jews had a nationalistic feel, and they wanted a nation of their own, just like every little country had their nation. Why can't Jews? And actually, this was considered a return because we started there, I have said to my students that, we were at one point in Palestine, a very rebellious community that the Romans couldn't keep together. So what did the Romans do? They dispersed us. I mean, they took the Jews to Europe, or the Jews went to, they became Sephardim, they went to other countries. But let's say I'm a Litva, I'm from Lithuania. How did I get there? Back. They came, the Romans took them, and they traveled through Germany, through Poland to Lithuania. So again, he didn't come to them saying, hey, you're bad people, bad anti-Semites. No, he said, you have a problem, basically. We have the same, we want the same thing, help us. And in fact, Poland and Romania were very eager to help. But sadly, it was, they say you bring 5 Jews together, you got 5 prime ministers. Sadly, they started to fight among each other. Jews, many Jews they lived in Poland, they wanted to stay in Poland, they wanted their rights in Poland. And here Jabotinsky came along and said, you gotta leave. And so when he said, listen, I wasn't saying everybody's got to run out, all the Jews. No, you want to stay, fine. But for those who want to leave, if the pressure gets really big, we need to have where to go.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Harvey, I was wondering, you discussed how that the Jews in Albany had this sort of dilemma, right, of being less vocal in dealing with anti-Semitism on local issues. I was wondering where is that rooted, and what level of reaction did local communities have if they were a bit more vocal about local issues?
Well, this is actually part of a larger study that I wrote, and I'm trying to get published, hasn't gotten published. And the first half, which actually is 2/3 of the article, is called The Solidarity of All Israel. And it deals with protests in Albany from 1853 to 2011 by local Jews against the treatment of Jews in other countries. Whether it's the Nazis in Germany or the anti-Jewish riots in Palestine in 1929, or the pogroms in Kishinev, etc. That there was the Albany Jewish community was very outspoken against anti-Semitism abroad, but was much more cautious. There was a report written by somebody locally, which I refer in the endnotes, and it was based on, I can't find those records any longer, based on the Albany Jewish Council records. And basically the Albany Jewish Council in the 1930s, well, it was founded in 1938, from 38 through the 60s, preferred to deal this low key. Rather than raising these issues in the newspapers to get publicity, they would send a representative to meet with businesses or landlords who were anti-Semitic in some sense. And so basically the Albany Jewish community, which tended to be led by members of Beth Emet. Beth Emet is the major Reform synagogue in Albany. I belong to a much smaller Reform synagogue, B'nai Shalom. And they tended to have a very low-keyed approach to dealing with anti-Semitism. because they were integrated into the community, and they tended to want to do this under the table. They didn't want anti-Semitism to be publicized. And this has been the pattern frequently in Albany in dealing with anti-Semitism, to do it quietly. Now, more recently, it's become more public, but certainly in the period from the 1880s, let's say, through the 1960s, you did it behind the scenes. You did not do this in public. Because you didn't want to upset people. And you didn't want to, a part of the assumption was if you highlighted anti-Semitism, it would lead to more anti-Semitism.
Was there any evidence of, were there cases of that where this was sort of publicized and then there was a backlash?
No, not really, because it didn't get publicized for the most part. They succeeded in keeping it quiet. That is the leaders of first of all, the Albany Jewish Community Council in 1938, which was established to represent the whole of the Jewish community. And they kept things quiet. It didn't get publicized. Only if incidents got publicized from other sources, like the newspapers. If they picked up, for example, on anti-Semitic graffiti outside a store, they would publicize it, not the Jewish community.
Okay.
So it was from other source, like a local newspaper. That's what got publicized.
May I say something?
Sure.
That's the problem. That's the problem. Other communities are not afraid to stand up and say, hey, look what's going on. The Jewish community, and I've written a lot about it during World War II, was so afraid of being considered un-American that I did a paper on the Jewish March of the Rabbis in Washington. They were not afraid because, hey, they're religious, they wear their caps, Americans were really afraid of being accused of not being American enough. And even Elie Wiesel said, Jews in America, they're very busy holding memorials for us while we're still alive. I can understand it, but when you're over there and you're in a concentration camp and your number may be up any minute, other groups are not like that. They stand up and they protest. The African Americans, all of them, but we are very slow to do that. Stephen Wise was very close with Roosevelt, and he went to him a lot as far as helping the Jews in Europe, but he kept it down because he was also afraid of being accused of being too Jewish and of making Jewish issues too central. We have to get out of that. That's not good, because even today, the only ism that's acceptable is anti-Semitism. And that's a terrible thing.
I have a quick question that, by the way, thank you so much, Harvey, Kevin, and Diane. Excellent, excellent presentations. I actually have a question. I have a question for Kevin, and then I have a question that is for both Diane and Harvey. I'm going to start with the question for Kevin. I found your presentation on Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution really fascinating, especially how you spoke about how Hindenburg used Article 48 multiple times. And one of those times you said, actually, it was Hindenburg who approved Article 48 for the Reichstag fire. I had always thought that it was Hitler who had done that, but I guess Hindenburg died slightly after that. So my question for you is, was Article 48 enacted when Hitler and his fellow Nazis launched the beer hall putsch?
That was in 1923, November 1923. And Article 48 was put in the Constitution in 1919. It was one of the original aspects of the Weimar Constitution that was established in 1919. Now, my conclusion is Hitler read that, and when he had the beer hall push, he knew that an illegal takeover of power was problematic, but that he had some good advisors. And those advisors, one of them was a person named Wilhelm Frick, who was the Interior Ministry of Germany. He was an administrative law expert. I've written on him too. He's the type of person who would say, you know, Adolf, they're back at this Article 48 thing and our beer hall push failed. Let's use that eventually. And that's what I think really happened.
Really interesting. Yeah. I was wondering if there was some connection there. And I think that that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Kevin. Diane and Harvey, this is for both of you. I have a kind of a more general question about the inherent problem of this ideology of assimilation. Is assimilation for the Jewish diaspora, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Germany, whether it's anywhere around the world, is assimilation fundamentally, in your opinion, is it something that holds back the Jewish people collectively, or is it something that is seen as like is it a necessary survival mechanism or adaptation for a group of people who have such a long history of being persecuted? And if so, does that, would you, well, I'll just leave it at that. Do you think it's something that needs to be done away with, or do you understand the necessity of it as some sort of a strategy for dealing with being in a very hostile environment? As Diane kept saying, it's not their nation, right? Not their country. And Harvey talked about how all of these throughout American history, all of these great examples of Jewish Americans being so patriotic, and yet still today, right, we have such horrible anti-Semitism and historical amnesia about the Holocaust, all these things. So I'll stop there, but I'm just curious on both of your takes on that.
All right, well, then I'll do this briefly. Essentially, assimilation has shown that it doesn't really work, because the worst massacre of Jews in American history was a Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Under the Trump administration. This did not happen in the 1820s. It happened in 21st century. So when Jews are assimilated, half of our Jews, like myself, marry non-Jews. And so, assimilation, Jews think they're assimilated, but non-Jews do not do them. A significant portion in this country don't care if Jews marry non-Jews. They're still Jews in their ideas, in their eyes, or of Jewish ancestry, which was good enough. It's sort of like the Hitler definition of you're a Jew, if for 3 generations racially, And so I say assimilation is what has happened to the American Jewish community because of the widespread intermarriage. And again, I'm an example of it. My first and second wives are not Jewish. But the reality is, while American Jews have felt comfortable in America, the reality is, in particular parts of the country, Jews are still aliens. They're still these weird people with a weird religion, no matter how assimilated they think they are or appear to be. So, my answer is assimilation is a fact, but it's not a fact as far as non-Jews, is how they view Jews.
You remind me of, I used to, in the summertime, not that long ago, I used to go to other universities in the West to take courses that I teach. It's really interesting. And I would stay in the dorm. It was really interesting. I did that in Missouri and in Montana and in Wyoming. And I remember I was a student, and it's nice to be a student. I enjoyed it even more than when I was a student. And I remember I was paired up, the first day of class, there's an icebreaker. And I was paired up with a young lady, and she said, everybody was Christian. She said, "What are you?" I said, "I'm Jewish." She looked at me. Now, this happened maybe 5 years ago. She never met a Jew. And maybe she was looking for my horns. I mean, I don't know. There are parts of America where there are not that many Jews. But what I wanted to say initially was, I used to teach a course in propaganda, And I remember the first thing I would ask the class is, how many Jews do you think are in the world? Oh, billions. And I said that with a B. Billions, billions. When they find out how few we are, that really, if you're talking about minorities, it's me you're talking about, they were shocked, you know. We are big in their eyes. Actually, in many cases, we are in communication. It makes us look like we're more than we are. And another thought that came to me is, listen, Theodor Herzl long ago said, for a Jew, there really is no such thing as assimilation. You may want to assimilate, but as you said, may I call you Harvey? Don't call me Diane. As you said, the non-Jew still sees he was a Jew. Cook yourself in borscht and sour cream, you're still a Jew, it doesn't matter. That's how it is. Whether assimilation is good or bad, I live in America. I love America. America was very good to me. 250,000 people, survivors of the Holocaust, came to America, and I was one of them. I'm very grateful to America, but I'm a Jew. And whether I like it or not, most people, I live in New York City. So, you know, we're many in New York. But I did find that as I traveled through America, where there are Jews, they stick together more because they feel the non-Jews around them. They're much more active in their centers. They're much more active in their synagogues. In New York, California, we're at home. There's so many of us. But there's still that feeling. And like I said, when African Americans are persecuted, they speak up. When Muslims are persecuted, they speak up. And when Jews are persecuted, we have Jews that forgive them immediately. I find that
Such an interesting answer for both of you. Yeah.
Could I have a small comment?
Sure.
I found, Diane mentioned the period leading up to World War II with Charles Lindbergh and all the other problems that were going on. And there's books about Jews being beaten in New York City, all sorts of, the Bund and all that. And so that's interesting. But then I want to comment on Harvey's paper, because my family is from Albany, New York. It's a Jewish family that we've traced back to about 1850. And I used to have discussions, my father's passed away, obviously, but I used to have discussions about this period. And he would tell me that just before World War II, there was a lot of anti-Semitic problems in the community, the local community in Albany. People had to change their names. My name is actually shortened. My name is Bronner. It was a much longer name. And my father was a practicing attorney, just starting out, a relatively young man, and couldn't get business. So he had to change his name. And my father would always talk about the different country clubs that there was discrimination. So there was, I could just add, I haven't heard of any of this before, but just being on this panel, I found it to be interesting. And just one other point, I'd like to, a friend of mine, he was a dentist in Albany. He's passed away. He's a proud Jewish person. I'm not going to mention his name. And he was so thrilled that he was a dentist in the Vietnam War. He volunteered. He was an Albany dentist. He volunteered to go to Vietnam and help the soldiers with their dentistry. So there are these miracle people that Harvey talked about.
Thank you.
That's about all I had to say.
It is also
You
interesting.
pointed out exactly.
Since you brought it up, many people blame Roosevelt for not doing more for the Jews. Many people. But few people realize how anti-Semitic the Congress was. It was another America. It was so anti-Semitic that if he would have said, if Roosevelt would have come out and said, we have to go help the Jews, my God, I don't think he would have survived in office.
In New York State, we had Hamilton Fish, who was one of the most anti-Semitic Congress people. He was from south of Albany, but I read all about that. And there were other cohorts in the Congress who were very anti-Semitic.
Very. It was, people don't realize it was a different world. It wasn't today. I mean, it's hey, but then, wow, he couldn't have done anything. It's easy to throw it on Roosevelt. He was a political animal. He wanted to be reelected. That was his interest.
Sure.
One of the problems he had was he was dependent on the chairs of congressional committees. While the Democrats controlled Congress, the chairs tended to be Southern Democrats, many of whom were anti-Semitic, remained anti-Semitic. They didn't like blacks, they didn't like Jews, they didn't like Asians, they didn't like Catholics. You know, for them, Al Smith would have horns. You know, Irish Catholics had horns from their perspective. And so one of the problems he had is he had to make his way between a significant segment of the Republican Party, not all Republicans, because there were a number of Republicans like Wilkie, Dewey, LaGuardia, who were sympathetic to the issue of Jewish refugees. But then there was the Midwestern group of Republicans combined with the Southern Democrats who did not want to see one more Jew come into the United States. And, you know, literally it became, eventually Roosevelt went and bent his reluctance to get involved, but only after Kristallnacht.
Right.
He only bent after Kristallnacht. Before that, he didn't want to touch it because it was too much of a hot button issue that would lose him public support. You know, he let Eleanor talk about refugees, but Eleanor could talk about anything she wanted as far as he was concerned, because he never did what Eleanor wanted him to do.
Yeah, she could show the empathy, and it made him look good too. But no, it was I think I don't mean to interrupt you. It was just people don't realize what another world it was.
And Eleanor is still the best first lady we've ever had, as far as I'm concerned.
This makes me think of, and I know a couple of you may have mentioned it, but the Nazi or the German Bund, right? The Fritz Kuhn, who was called himself the American Führer. And at Madison Square Garden, right, in New York City, right, there were like 20,000 American Nazis right behind a big banner of George Washington. And this was 7 months before Hitler invaded Poland, I believe. So it's in many ways, we think we've come a long way. And during this panel, I'm reconsidering how far we have come. You know, we don't have
we've gone very far in technology, but people haven't changed.
And by the way, Union College invited Fritz Kuhn to speak at Union over the opposition of the local Jewish and Catholic community.
Oh my goodness.
Well, at least they spoke up. That's good.
That they spoke up about. The Jews and Catholics said that's one step too far. Have Fritz Kuhn speak at Union. But he spoke there anyway.
He did?
Yeah,
Well,
because the president of Union was a historian, Dixon Ryan Fox, who couldn't stand Jews.
Oh, Dixon. Well, actually, it was LaGuardia who protected them and allowed them to have their meeting there. I wrote about the German-American Bund meeting where Fritz Kuhn spoke. Yeah, he protected them. And he even gave, I think he was the one who gave Fritz Kuhn a Jewish police to protect him.
And didn't LaGuardia also have a half sister who was in the concentration camps?
Yes, she was in Ravensbrück.
There's a lot of connections here.
Yeah, and well, he was part Jewish. I believe his mother was Jewish. I wrote the paper a while back, and his sister survived. His sister survived.
There were Bund chapters in the Capital District. There was a Bund chapter in Troy, another Bund chapter in Delmar, which is a suburb of Albany. So there were at least 2 Bund chapters in the immediate area, as there were chapters of the Ku Klux Klan.
It is
We've
amazing.
gone to the picnic in 1930 of the Ku Klux Klan Tri-County Conclave from Schenectady, if you'd been here in 1930 in Albany.
It is amazing how anti-Semitism has survived through the ages. Wow. You know, you think it's gone and there it is again.
In
Especially
fact, the Jewish war veterans were organized in Albany to go after the German-American Bund. And
How
they
successful were they?
They stopped a rally because the Bund was going to meet actually in the Jewish neighborhood in Troy, seriously, River Street, which was the Jewish neighborhood in Troy. And they were going to celebrate Anschluss. And the Jews, members of the Jewish war veterans from Albany, went there and managed to pressure the owner of the venue, Germania Hall, to not allow the Bund to meet. And then to make their point, they went and got into a Donnybrook with the German-American Bund chapter in Delmar. So a little fisticuffs took place down in Delmar. So the Jewish war veterans were a very active group. They were primarily World War I vets and were organized in 1935 here in the Albany area.
Mm.
So they were one group that did not keep quiet, the Jewish war vets.
That's good.
I think we are just about coming up on our time. Matt, do you want to conclude with one final question?
If I pose a question, it'll be more pointed, right, rather than a sort of a group one. So I think it'd be best to sort of conclude it here.
Sure. Well, everybody, I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your amazing research papers, and I know I can speak for both Matt and myself that we've come away from this much more wiser on all three topics. Thank you very much, and take care.